Okay, geometry students, in this video we will be studying how to use congruent triangles to help us prove that certain parts of two triangles are congruent. Okay, let me say that again. We are going to be studying how to use congruent triangles to help us prove that certain parts of two triangles are congruent. Okay, so we've learned how to prove that triangles are congruent. Now we're going to learn how to use that information to help us prove that parts of a triangle are congruent, okay? And I will definitely explain that a little better a little later, okay? Your heading for today is using using congruent triangles. Your lesson is 4.5, and be sure and include today's date, okay? Using congruent triangles, and we're going to learn how to use those today. Lesson 4.5, and be sure and include today's date in your notes. Now, remember, we have used capital letters to stand for certain postulates or theorems in the past. Remember? You don't need to write this down, but you should remember this. We've used SSS for side, side, side. We've used SAS for side, angle, side. We've used AAS for angle, angle, side, and we've used ASA for angle, side, angle. Okay, so you should be used to this. This should not be something uncommon to you. And having said that, we are going to learn now a new set of capital letters that stands for something very important. And the letters are CPCTC. Now go ahead and write that in your notes off to the side. You might want to write them like this, because it's an acronym is what it is, and I'm going to show you what each word stands for, or what each letter stands for in just a second, okay? So in this lesson, we're going to learn to use a new set of capital letters, and they stand for something very important. And once again, the letters are CPCTC, okay? And I would write this in your notes. Now here's what they stand for. Congruent, and this should be corresponding. That's incorrect. I thought I fixed that, so sorry about that, guys. Old age, I guess. And this should be congruent. This should be congruent, okay? So if you will fix that also, put it in right there. Okay. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Okay. Okay. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And you can see now how that fits. C, P, C, T, C. Okay? Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So please write that down with your letters. I would encourage you to have your notes like this, and then just fill these words in. Okay? You're going to hear this a lot. C, P, C, T, C. Okay? So what does this mean, guys? What does it mean when I say corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent? Well, I'm glad that you asked, okay? It simply means that when you know or prove that two triangles are congruent, you then can state that the corresponding parts are congruent. Doesn't that make sense? I mean, look, if I told you that this triangle here is congruent to this triangle here, as soon as I tell you that, you then know, as long as the two triangles are lined up correctly, you know this angle is congruent to this angle, you know this angle is congruent to this angle, and you know this angle is congruent to this angle, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to go through everything. I'm just going to put quick marks on them if I can get my pen to work here. Okay, so it is kind of common sense that when two triangles are congruent, you then know that all of their parts are congruent. Okay, so with that in mind, I would like you to, let me give you a picture. I want you to write this down, okay? I want you to write this down. Write in your notes, triangle ABC is congruent to triangle XPT, okay? Write that down. And then think of all the things that you can list by using CPCTC. Pretend that we were doing a proof, okay? And pretend in your proof that you were given, take some good notes now, okay? Watch this. Pretend in a proof you were given this. Well, think of all the things you could state You can state that angle A is congruent to angle X. Could you not? Here's A, the first letter. Here's X, the first letter. And in a proof, what would your reason be? You would just put CPCTC. Because look, students, as soon as you know these two triangles here are congruent, then you know all their parts are congruent. Let's go ahead and list out everything that we know, and over here put CPCTs for the reason, okay? So pretend we're doing a proof here. Just list things out, okay? You can work ahead or you can stay with me. Angle B is congruent to angle P. Of course, the reason would be CPCTC. You could also state that angle C is congruent to angle T. And of course, the reason would be CPCTC. Okay? You could also state that AB, your first two letters, would be congruent to your first two letters over here, XP. Of course, the reason would be CPCTC. And again, you can work with me or you can work ahead. It's up to you. I'm going to take my next two letters. BC would be congruent to PT. And then my first letter is A and my last letter is C. So AC is congruent to XT. And again, the reason would be CPCTC. Okay, students? So we're going to use this a lot. So get used to that. And you can use this once you have stated that two triangles are congruent. You can then state that any of their parts are congruent. Okay, I hope that makes sense. I'm going to move on. If you need to pause the video, then feel free to do that, okay? We're going to go ahead and move on. Now, for the remainder of the video, we are going to work on two proofs, okay? We're going to look at two proofs today. So I'm going to go ahead and pause while you copy this in your notes, okay? Do the best you can to draw this figure over here, and then go ahead and copy down your given, and then your proof part, and then you're welcome to work ahead and try this on your own if you want to, or you can watch me do it and take notes as we go along. It's totally up to you guys. Give you guys a couple more seconds to copy this down. Copy down this figure, copy down your given, and then copy down your proof part. Okay, here we go. Now, if you're still copying stuff down, that's fine. You can listen while you're copying it down. I've taught you guys in the past when you're doing a proof like this. First of all, if you're doing a theorem proof, remember what to do. You first draw your picture or your figure, okay? Then you list out your if part, that's your given. Then you list out your then part, which is your proof part, and then you go from there. You pick up your given and you put it on your picture, okay? Now, we've done that before and we'll do it again throughout the year, but this is not a theorem proof, okay? This is just regular proofs. The first thing we do is we take our given and we put it over here on the figure. So C is the midpoint of AE. So C is right in the middle of AE. Okay? So if C is right in the middle, then we know this figure here is congruent to this figure here. Okay? Now, this segment is congruent to this segment here. Now, we also know that C is the midpoint of BD. So C is right in the middle of BD. So C is right in the middle of BD. Then we know BC has to be congruent to CD. Okay? Now, we're going to prove that this side here is congruent to this side here. Now, that's going to be basically impossible to do, okay? Unless we can state that this triangle here, we'll call it triangle number 1, is congruent to this triangle over here. If we can state that, then remember, as soon as we state that the two triangles are congruent, then we can state that their parts are congruent. So we can state that AB is congruent to DE. Think about that, okay? It totally makes sense. So with that in mind, let's see if we can't prove that these two triangles are congruent. And then once we prove that, We can then state that this side here is congruent to this side here. So let's brainstorm here, okay? We know that we can state that AC is congruent to CE. And we know that we can state that BC is congruent to CD. And look at this. Let's put a 1 here. You can put numbers on figures. I don't mind that on a test or a quiz. You're welcome to do that. So we'll put a 1 here and a 2 here. We know that angles 1 and 2 are congruent because they're vertical angles. So I have side, angle, side congruent to side, angle, side. So I can definitely state that those two triangles are congruent. Okay? So that's a pretty good plan of attack. I'm going to use side, angle, side. And then once I state that the two triangles are congruent, I can definitely state that AB is congruent to DE. Okay, let's go ahead and give this a shot and see how we do. Here we go. First of all, we got our statements and our reasons. Now again, you're welcome to work ahead on this if you want to, or watch me. It's up to you. But if you make a mistake in your notes, make sure you correct it. Okay. All right. Number 1 is our given. Okay. Okay. Now, number 2, I'm going to put 2 things on number 2 because I'm going to use the same reason over here. Okay. Look, if C is the midpoint of AE and also C is the midpoint of BD, then I'm going to go ahead and state right here AC is congruent to CE, and I'm also going to state that BC is congruent to CD. And the reason would be definition of midpoint. So students, I'm going to come up here and make a little checklist. Okay, remember, I want to state that AC is congruent to CE. I want to state that BC is congruent to CD. And I also want to state that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. And then I can use side, angle, side. I'm going to go ahead and check these off, okay? I've done those 2, okay? Now let's work on angles 1 and 2. So first of all, I've got to state their vertical angles, okay? Angles 1 and 2 are vertical angles. And of course, that would be definition. The reason would be definition of vertical angles, okay? Now, moving on to number 4, I can now state that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2 because vertical angles are congruent. Okay, pretty simple. All right, so check that off. Now, I have side, angle, side of one triangle congruent to side, angle, side of another triangle. So I am ready to state that my two triangles are congruent. But hold it. I know that my reason is going to be what? Side, angle, side. However, please listen, students. Make sure you list out your congruent statement correctly. Be very, very careful. Look, I don't care how you list out the first triangle. I don't care if you call it ABC or ACB or CBA or whatever. Okay, I'm just going to put ABC. The first triangle doesn't matter. But now the second triangle has to line up. Okay, so here we go. Be very careful. We have to deal with angles. Okay. Now, we know for sure that angle C right here is going to be congruent to angle C. Okay? Everybody see that? We know that. Here's my two triangles. Okay, here's one triangle here and one triangle here. ABC and DCE. This angle here is congruent to this angle here. So I know if C is at the end, I know that C has to be on the end down here. Now look at angle A. Angle A is on the side. Look, angle A right here is on the side that has one slash. Okay, so I come to the other triangle and I look for the side that has one slash. And here it is. So I go to the end, and that'll be this angle here. So angle E is the angle that corresponds with angle A. Hopefully you see that okay. Look again, students. This side here has one slash, and this side here has one slash. So this angle here has to correspond with this angle here. So if A is first, then E has to come first. And then obviously there's only one letter left over here. That's angle D. So there we go. Now look, students, we're done. We're totally done. I'm going to put step 6 up here. We're totally done. Look, you just stated these two triangles are congruent. And what are you trying to prove? AB is congruent to ED. Well, look at your congruent statement here. Here's AB, first two letters, and here's ED, your first two letters. So you're totally good, okay? So I can state that AB is congruent to ED, and we just learned today the reason. CPCTC, that's all you got to put. CPCTC. And the reason you can put that is because you just proved that two triangles are congruent. So if they're congruent, then all of their parts are congruent, okay? Remember this page back here in your notes where once we had two triangles congruent, we could list out any of these 6 things here, okay? Any of those. All right, let's move on to one more proof. And I will pause a second here while you go ahead and copy this down. I'll just sit here and be quiet. Copy down your given. And then copy down your proof part. Okay, and I did forget to put angles 1 and 2 on here. Let me put that for you right here. Let's see. This angle here is a right angle, and this angle here is a right angle, okay? All right, go ahead and copy this down. Please copy this quickly, but not hurriedly. Be neat and be organized, but don't take too much time, okay? Here's your given. Copy that down. Here's your proof part. Okay? And then here's your figure. Copy all that down. Okay, just a couple more seconds. And then when we start the proof, if you're still copying things down, that's fine. You can copy things down while you're listening to what I'm saying. Okay, students, here we go. Now, please listen carefully. The first thing we do is we take our given and we put it on our figure. So here we go. A is the midpoint of TN. Now, this is a problem. So please watch carefully. This is a problem. A is right in the middle of TN. So I know that TA is congruent to AN. The problem is if I put a slash here, you might think it refers to RA. Or if I put a slash here and here, you might think it refers to TR. So I'm going to do something a little unusual in geometry. You can do this however you want to. I'm just going to highlight the side. I'm going to say TA is congruent to AN, okay? So there we go. Now continuing on, CT is congruent to ON. So here's CT, put a slash, congruent to ON, put a slash. CA, put 2 slashes, is congruent to AO. So put 2 marks here, okay? Now, angles 1 and 2 are right angles, so I'm going to put a right angle symbol here and a right angle symbol here. Okay? Now, actually, let's do one thing, and please be patient with your old math teacher, guys. Let's put angle 2 over here. That's where it should be. And I apologize, okay? Just erase it and fix it, okay? And all right, moving on. Now, we're going to have to brainstorm here and come up with an idea. Now, our goal is to prove that this triangle here is congruent to this triangle over here. That's our goal, okay, students? And we can see that right here. That's our goal, okay? This is going to be really difficult to do. Now, off the top of my head, I can see right away that it's going to be pretty easy to prove. Now, you should see this right away, students. It should be easy to prove that this big triangle here is congruent to this big triangle here. That's easy to do. And that's easy to do because I can use side, side, side. Look, I've got this side here, congruent to this side here. I've got this side here, congruent to this side here, and I've got this side here. I guess I got put like kind of like 3 marks here, is congruent to this side over here. Okay, so that's pretty easy to do. So I'm trying to think to myself, would that help any? I think it would help if I listed TCP or TCA congruent to NOA. I'm just brainstorming right now, guys. Okay, just totally brainstorming. Now, if I did that, if I stated that these triangles here were congruent, look what I can state. Let's see if this works. See this angle right here? Once I state that this big triangle here is congruent to this big triangle over here, I can then state that this angle here is congruent to this angle here by CPCTC. So I could state that angle T is congruent to angle N. Now once I do that, I think it becomes pretty easy to prove that these little triangles are congruent, because look, in this little triangle right here, I have side, angle, angle, or in other words, angle, angle, side, congruent to angle, angle, side, because I know that right angles are congruent. So I think I've got a pretty good plan of attack, but I want to go over this one more time, okay? Just to make sure we're all on the same page here. I'm going to start off by stating my big triangles are congruent, okay? Then after I do that, I'm then going to state that angle T is congruent to angle N by CPCTC. Then I can state that triangle TCR is congruent to triangle ROI, or excuse me, NOI by side, angle, side. So let's go through this really slow. If you're a little confused, just watch how I do this and see if this makes sense, okay? So here we go. All right, got my statements, got my reasons, and here we go. First of all, you list out your given. That's the first thing that you do, is list out your given. Now, let's see, A is the midpoint of Tn. So in my given, I've already stated that CT is congruent to ON right here, and CA right here is congruent to OA. So next, I'm going to state that TA is congruent to AN. Okay, my green segment here is congruent to my green segment here. And the reason would be, how do I know that? Well, A is the midpoint of Tn. A is the midpoint of Tn. So, definition of midpoint. So in your given right here, you've already stated CT is congruent to ON. You've already stated that CA is congruent to OA. So now I can go ahead and state that my big triangle TCA is congruent to triangle. Now be careful, match up corresponding angle with corresponding angle. Okay, be careful. I have TCA congruent to NOA. Okay, and the reason would be side, side, side. I stated these two sides are congruent. I stated these two sides are congruent, and I stated these two sides are congruent. Okay, so side, side, side. Now, watch carefully. I know that these two triangles are congruent. So if I know those two triangles are congruent, then I can state that angle T right here is congruent to angle N right here. Because remember, take this page back here, as soon as I know that two triangles are congruent, I can state any of these 6 things by CPCTC. So I can now state that angle T is congruent to angle N. And of course the reason would be CPCTC. So I'm going to go and put a mark here. I'm going to go ahead and put a mark here. Now, in order for me to state that this triangle right here is congruent to this triangle over here, I've got to be sure and state some things. For example, I have to state that CT is congruent to ON. Okay? This side here is congruent to this side here. Alright, now I've already stated that right here. Look up here. Right here it was given to me. Okay? So also somewhere in my proof I've got to state that angle T is congruent to angle N. Okay? I have to state that somewhere. And I did, right here. So the only thing left for me to state is angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Okay? And as soon as I state that, put 2 marks here, 2 marks here, I have angle side of one triangle congruent to angle side of another triangle. So this is the last thing I have to state right here. So I'm going to go ahead and state that. Now I already know in my given, look right here in my given, I've already been told that angles 1 and 2 are right angles, so I can go ahead and state right away angle 1 is congruent to angle 2, and the reason would be all right angles are what? Congruent. Okay? So I've stated this now too. So I've stated all 3 of these things, so I can definitely state now that triangle CRT is congruent to triangle OIN, and the reason would be side, angle, or in other words, angle, side is congruent to angle, side. Okay? Now let's stop and think what we've learned today. Okay, first of all, we've learned that we're going to use a new set of letters called CPCTC. Okay? Secondly, we looked at what that means. That means that we can list 6 different things when we know that 2 triangles are congruent, okay? Because there are 6 parts congruent to 6 parts. Then we looked at a proof in which, in order for us to prove that 2 segments were congruent, we first had to prove that 2 triangles were congruent, which we did right here. And then once we proved those 2 triangles were congruent, we could then state that those 2 segments were congruent. Now this proof here is a little different. We were trying to prove that 2 triangles were congruent. So in order to do that, we first had to prove that 2 bigger triangles were congruent, and then after we did that, we could then state that T was congruent to N because these 2 angles are part of these congruent triangles, and then we could state that we had 2 congruent triangles. Okay? Now this is not easy, and I'm not asking you guys to get up in front of the class and do a proof or anything like that. And I will give you some pretty tough proofs on future tests, okay? But I will also grade them very reasonably. The last test that we took, guys, well, I won't get into that now. But anyways, I hope this has made sense. Please study it well. Re-watch the video if you have to. And please work hard on this, okay? If you have any questions, don't hesitate to call or email.